Previously on Scales of Power.
I'm kinda bummed out we never found out more about the conduit. Well, I'm sure it's not that big of a deal.
Hello one and all, it's me, Marionik90. Welcome to a kinda secret episode of Power Scales that will work as a companion piece to my larger power scaling arc, I guess you could call it, where I go over Xenoblade Chronicles series of games. This video was long time in making, far longer than I initially anticipated, since I had all the material ready, and I didn't even have the excuse of working on some other videos at the same time now, so what gives? I had trouble. I definitely wasn't just lazy and putting this off or anything. As you may have observed from the title, this video will seek to explore two quite ambitious topics during its over 50-minute runtime. First, we'll be taking a look at the Xeno games prior to Xenoblade Chronicles series and explore how they connect to the modern entries of the franchise that I'm currently scaling. And second topic will have us explore these connections and their implications to the power scaling of Xenoblade. You may be prompted to ask why release this video now before going over the actual third game in the actual Xenoblade series and not after, or why I didn't open with it. The reason for this arrangement is simple. One some of you may have already guessed. The importance of Xenoblade 2 in this puzzle, as that is the game that solidifies the connection between the series and its predecessors. So, I hope you'll enjoy this delve into the more obscure Xeno lore. Though, I have to warn you, this video will be more tangent heavy than my other Xeno videos, because I thought my random ramblings were worth something. You see, the thing with Xeno lore is that it's complex. So by the time we are done here, you too have suffered like I did, studying and chronicling all these chronicles. This is my punishment, retribution from on high. Anyway, with that mandatory introduction out of the way, join me in this journey through a Xeno rabbit hole. Let's go. Alright, are any of you watching familiar with Xenogears and Xenosaga?
Not really.
Thought so. Well, for starters, Xenogears was PlayStation 1 brainchild of Takahashi Tetsuya and Saga Soriya, and among other crazy shit, was their rejected idea for then in development Final Fantasy VII. I highly recommend that you look into the behind-the-scenes stuff of this very rough around the edges gem, since it's a seriously interesting story on how it even got made. Xenogears is infamous for transforming into a borderline visual novel halfway through, with walls of text and cutscenes replacing most of the gameplay to tell you a convoluted story that delves into things like religion, identity, dimensional theories, and fundamental conditions of human existence. Ideas that would become trademarks of Takahashi's later works. It's definitely the hardest to get into out of all of the Xeno titles, thanks to most of the background information in the story being relegated to revelations in the final couple of hours, and all the written side material. Also, all the Takahashi-isms that would later become the series stables are amped up to 11. There's all these mysterious peoples talking in dark rooms about soon-to-happen shit, plans or data or some other cryptic nonsense, like if I was meant to make any f***ing heads or tails about it. I mean, literally every time that spinning ballsack of video screens appeared, I groaned, knowing I had to take notes and cross-reference them with everything later. And there are all these f***ing characters that I think are supposed to have a point, but every time they appeared, I ended up asking, but why though? And multiple characters have like 100 alternate selves bumping into each other to confuse the shit out of the audience. At the end of the day, most of the problems with this title can be reasoned to be thanks to the inexperienced development team and time constraints. But even despite all of these factors, it's still a pretty solid game. Xenosaga, however, is spiritual successor to many elements from Xenogears. Originally meant to be like million episodes long crazy space epic stretching over thousands of years, it eventually crystallized into a trilogy of flawed yet excellent JRPGs, helmed by Takahashi and other talented individuals. These three goodies are known for featuring some of the most complex characters in Xeno games. Shout out to Albedo for being a goated villain, as well as world building, even more intricate and confusing confusing than Vocaloid's Xenogears Chronicles. This time, the creation of the confusion simply stems from just how much story there is to keep track of, and few plot points that either get contradicted or forgotten midway. After these two series, many who worked on them, including Takahashi, would bring what they learned making them over to that old money-grabbing Hanafuda company, Nintendo, after they bought their development team, Monolift Soft, created after the release of Xenogears. And this is where the story of Xenoblade Chronicles would begin. In summation, the influence of prior Xeno games runs deep in the DNA of modern Chronicles series. These are the games that walked so Xenoblade could sprint. It pleases me to know how new fans discover these older games and go like, huh? Huh? When I already knew most of this. Like, bro, I was liking Xenosaga before Xenoblade even existed, just as God intended. Actually, I think the first time I heard of Xenoblade was when Smash 4 was coming out and people were discussing if Shulk had a chance of becoming a playable character. And I remember being so confused, since to younger me it seemed like there were like 3 unrelated game series that were all called Xeno something or the other. What was the connection? By the way, did I mention my compulsive tendency to go off topic? Believe me when I say this, there's far more to it than just the shared names and developers paying tribute to their own titles, and as I'll soon detail, it's all important to the lore and scaling of Xenoblade series as a whole. That's right. Taking into account all the time I spent watching walkthroughs etc. of these 4 games and studying what the hell is happening in them, that original graph with 600 plus total hours is looking a lot more like 700 plus right now, actually. You're welcome. While understanding the narratives and themes of these 4 games would indeed be helpful for you guys watching, it's not mandatory, as just understanding of the concepts that relate to Xenoblade is needed. Something I plan on providing to you. Trust me, I'd like nothing more than to explore the rich stories of these games, but...
Insert a joke here about how this video would be several hours longer.
And it bears repeating, this series of videos is not narrative analysis, and we are only talking about that Chad alpha crap here, like how much these characters beat up Goku and the like. So please, for the love of Udo, go and explore the stories of these games on your own time. Trust me, it'll be worth your while. There are fantastic retro perspectives on both Gears and Saga on YouTube, and the games themselves can be played via, well, as of the current gaming preservation climate, crime shit. Alright, let's finally move on to Xeno connections. Let's begin by examining the relationship between Xenogears and Xenosaga. Do they take place in the same universe? The two share a myriad of concepts, such as elemental forces like ether and mechs and other notable technologies and very similar lore. It gets to the point that there are even characters literally sharing names and designs, or exact descriptions of the two things being same word for word, and some people are still not seeing it. Alright, maybe there's significant overlap. Or maybe Takahashi just felt annoyed that nobody listened to him the first time and simply wanted to repeat himself. However, actual connecting glue between the two game series exists. Xenogears is set thousands of years after the godlike superweapon, Deus, crash-landed on another planet, along with Zohar, and remade humans anew, Deus system having been created by human civilization, who long abandoned their planet of origin in favor of spreading to the stars. From this backstory, it would be easy to conclude that this ancient spacefaring humanity is in fact the same one we see in Xenosaga, tooling around the universe, thousands of years before they created Deus. Both humanities in the games have been depicted doing some pretty shifty stuff with the mystical object Zohar, and have other similarities, but more notably, organizations and concepts from Saga basically get name-dropped, albeit slightly altered, but above all, it would just make sense that Saga is prequel to Gears. Gears was supposed to be the 5th episode of a 6-part saga, with Xenosaga taking place in the Space Age, described as the 1st episode, in the timeline shown in Xenogears Perfect Works. Except the details don't exactly line up. But what's few retcons for a prequel? That's normal. Star Wars wouldn't even have a plot if we weren't allowed to retcon stuff. Clearly Takahashi just wanted to change few things along the way. Please, he breeds retcons at this point. But no. In truth, the two can't be connected, as far as the law is concerned. Xenogears was developed under Square Enix, and they still own the series rights, despite Takahashi and everyone having left the company. Since Takahashi couldn't take his story with him, he was basically forced to start over at Namco with new IP. In other words, Xenosaga would be sequel to Xenogears if they were owned by the same company, but unfortunately they are not, which also explains those changes in lore details. Takahashi and Yoshidumi Makoto have both confirmed this in 2001 GameSpot interview before the first episode of Saga came out. Also, the prior mentioned Soryu Saga basically said the same thing. In essence, Xenosaga is meant to be reconstruction of Gears universe from its beginning to its end. A reboot, or mighty number 90fication of it, if you will. So the two do not share continuity and weren't really meant to. So throw that idea out of the window, I guess. You could headcanon both into being in the same universe with all the shared lore and whatnot, but Takahashi doesn't really agree with you. But the thing is, it doesn't really matter whether or not these two are connected, since we can basically ignore Gears as far as power scale is concerned. Since the same stuff is in Saga, only more fleshed out and,
Stronger.
I just wanted to give that title the shout out it deserves, since these old ass games are f***ing disappearing. Thusly, for the purposes of this video, I'll be mostly referring to Saga, and the info from Gears will at best be used as supporting evidence to flesh out some details. Or you can just ignore Gears, please, by all means. Leave out everything I say in regards to it, if you think it doesn't count, but I think it's only fair to take it into account, considering all this stuff began with it. Yeah, I'm hearing you. I too was originally under the impression that Gears was the stronger of the two series, both scaling and story-wise, but after going through all the games and their side stories for this video, well, all I can say is...
Hello! You've got it all wrong!
The main ordeal of this video was not connecting Gears to Saga, but connecting the one with all the good stuff, Saga, to Blades. But how do we do that? What proves that the two connect?
Get on with it!
A lot of things, actually. Basically, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is the most important game in the f***ing Xeno franchise, and most of the connections are blatantly established there. Behind that rom-com harem exterior hides the deepest lore this series has seen yet. The game notably threw out Mysterio's trans-universal object, the Conduit, as the reason for everything happening in Xenoblade. Have you ever stopped to ask why? Like, they didn't need to explain how and what for Klaus split the universes, Xeno 1 didn't. So this being added into the lore was deliberately done to connect back to the prior Xeno works. Or like, hey, that thing from many years ago, it's still out there. That thing being the most important central object from both Xenosaga and Gears, the Zohar. Despite the Conduit having different name, each shares its function with the Zohar, both being gates to other universes and higher realms, as well as sources of limitless power. Not only that, but they are directly equated by the developers, such as in the very game files, where Conduit's assets are straight up named Zohar. Xeno 3 art book depicts concept art of several Zohars with Xenosaga's design, likely referencing Zohar emulators, with a similar object appearing in Xeno X, likely that universe's version of the gateway. Another big piece of evidence is how description of relationship between Artifices and Conduit found in Xeno 2 Siren model kit is literally taken word for word from the description of the relationship between the mechanical Gears and Zohar from Xenogears.
My unique, you idiot! You're reaching like you always do. Alphabet has only 26 letters. It happens.
Motherfucker, did you hear anything I just said? It's a combination of all these factors that make these things more than references. If any of them were the only ones, we wouldn't have this discussion right now. Oh, and lastly, despite the Conduit looking very different from the Zohar, which can be explained via every universe likely having their own Zohars that connect them to the higher realms, and thus they'd have different but similar form depending on the universe. But the original design literally appears in the series' 10-year anniversary art, indicating Blade's connection to Saga. The Conduit is clearly meant to be Zohar, just under a different name. Same function, same narrative, same lore, basically same everything. There's also a lot of that same synergy Gears and Saga had going between them, with many things in Xenoblade taking heavy inspiration from its predecessors. Xeno 2 in particular having very similar story to Xenogears. Let's list some examples. For instance, Xenoblade X's ghosts share many things in common with the Gnosis, while the Mobius from Xeno 3 not only fulfill functions of Xenosaga's testaments, but the Gnosis as well. Our characters taking on or having to confront alternative personas of themselves is also one of the many commonalities between every single one of these games. There are so many of these little references that entire websites have been set up just to keep track of this self-referential insanity. Links in the description, you'll be surprised. Basically everything in Xenoblade connects back to Gears and Saga. Vessels of Anima are Omnigears, are the ES, are the Weltall, ID, is the Artificers, is Ion, is Ares, Deus, and the Monado, is Albus, who is Aegis, is the Trinity Processors, are the Conduit, that is the Zohar, is the Ether, is the Wave Existence, is Udu, are the Gods, and so forth and so forth. Were you dense? Why are you saying Conduit is so hard despite its legally distinct shape? These are all just inspirations and similar things. Stop using references to forge connections. You can't do that. Arrest that man. Oh, if you think that's all I've got, you'll have another thing coming. The most damning piece of connecting tissue between Saga and Blade is the literal appearances from Sirius's characters within Xeno 2. One being Cosmos. Character is so popular that she's literally in every game ever, yet almost nobody f***ing knows who she is. Also Telos, she's also here. She's my ideal female, and they are both in Xeno 2.
Wait! That's just a crossover, and you can't prove that these two are the same Cosmos and Telos. Those two are blades that come out of those crystal Pokeballs like everything, not some android hose. You said that Klaus was a filthy dweeb, right? Maybe Xenosaga is just a game in Xenoblade reality that he's a fan of, and first thing he did as a god was to bring his waifus alive. How about that?
That would violate the copyright of Vector Industries, but okay. While the whys and hows of Cosmos and Telos becoming blades is left a mystery, since no one in these games knows who they are even supposed to be. The only ones in Xenoblade who would probably be Fiora and Mainnet, if Project X Zone is to be believed, and likely the Architect, since he's responsible for the blades. Even among all the blades, Cosmos and Telos are hinted to be special, possessing knowledge unique to them that references Saga's lore, and notably, Cosmos demonstrates the same unbreakable connection to her creator, Xion, as in Xenosaga, or at least a substitute, as seen in her Blade quest. Interestingly, her model and art book entry both include logo of Vector Industries, the company that built her, along with almost exact replica of her description from Xenosaga 3's art book, albeit with obscured dates, and curiously higher serial number, not only hinting that this is the same Cosmos from the Saga games, who somehow ended up inside a core crystal, but also that Xion still built and or rebuilt her at some point. Only thing we know for a fact is that she's the same character as in Saga, which works to prove the Sirius's connection to Xenoblade. That X-Zone thing, by the way. Ever wondered why Cosmos is paired with Fiora? Yes, the two parallel each other heavily. I'm not questioning that, but literally no other character in X-Zone is paired with a character from quote-unquote another series, suggesting that the developers are trying to tell us that Saga and Blade are connected. X-Zone of course having been developed and given OK by Monolift Soft. On top of this mountain of Cosmos moments from Xenoblade, she and rest of the Xenosaga cast and iconography are featured in modern releases of Xeno series' art and merch, even directly shown in a video, celebrating the history of Monolift Soft alongside the other Xeno protagonists like she's part of the gang. The most unsubtle way of confirming that they consider Xenosaga part of the larger Xeno series with Xenoblade. They are the same. Also, psych! This is borderline beyond confirmed at this point, thanks to Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. During the game's post-credits scene, spoilers for Future Redeemed by the way, we see a blue light approach the new unified planet born after Xeno 3's story. Blue light that aggressively calls back to the post-credits of Xenosaga 3. Monolith blatantly saying, "Yeah, that's Cosmos and she's coming back, baby." Not enough for you? During the scene where everyone's inside Ontos' projection of Klaus's original world within the Ark, there's this radio nonchalantly playing in the background. And this thing, this fucking box, it's just fucking there, dropping lore bombs like it's nothing. And longtime Xeno fans immediately lost their shit. Fucking hell, not only does it confirm the existence of Vector Industries in the Xenoblade via their logo, but also that Dmitry Yuriev, that rotten soul, was one of the people who had hand in the matters regarding the Conduit project and the happenings of Klaus's world. Yuriev being a character who's intrinsically tied to the lore of Xenosaga series. There's also mention of coalition government, etc., so maybe Xeno X has something to do with all of this? Though I don't know about that, considering how many times that one has been confirmed to be a separate universe from rest of the Blade trilogy. Man, literally all Xeno titles are represented in this fucking broadcast in reference porn form, to the point I almost get the feeling that radio is intercepting transmissions from other universes. But if that was the case, it wouldn't be clean, unbroken broadcast that's all clearly talking about Klaus's world. If it wasn't, it would be like Bumblebee whenever he tries to speak in those Bayformers movies. I know some of this might be old news to most of you, so you all have to forgive me for repeat information. It's just important that we all understand what we are working with here. Naturally, this not only proves yet another huge connection between Saga and Blade, but also hints at something bigger to come down the line. While technically Xenosaga 2 is owned by a different studio than Blade, Bandai Namco, we are practically just waiting for a major crossover between Saga and Blade to be a focus of major project at this point. They wouldn't tease us with all these bloody obvious snippets if that wasn't coming at some point. You could even say that two worlds that were once apart are becoming one again. I guess there's still the problem of Xenosaga trilogy needing remasters for modern consoles, lest we want people to be confused as all balls when the time comes. We'll just have to wait and see how Monolift and Bandai are gonna clutch this. So enough of fanboying for now, and let's focus back on the matter at hand. After all these connections have been laid out this cleanly, it's pretty obvious what the developers are implying here. Though, even after seeing all of this, most poor souls still don't know what to do with the information. Like, how can this all fit together into one cohesive universe? Well, my astute viewers, I have cooked up 4 theories that might provide an answer. First explanation is less satisfying, but completely sensible. It all occupies the same multiverse. As stated in several of the games, there are both infinite universes and futures, meaning that all Xeno titles can easily coexist. The instances of Zohar showing up in them being different Zohars of each universe, and all the cameos and shared concepts make sense, no questions asked, by either being crossovers from different AU, or just most universes sharing things in common to a degree. The second explanation is more convoluted: the eternal recurrence. To even understand what that word means, I need to touch on some good old Xeno cosmology. In Xenosaga, universe is obviously not limited to the third dimension, and there exist several higher dimensions, such as the imaginary number domain, a realm made up of imaginary numbers, but most importantly, it contains all the non-physical things beyond the material existence, including human thought, belief, concepts, and even soul. Each time a human dies in the material universe, their soul is set free inside the imaginary domain. It would be ideal for these souls to get assimilated into the collective unconscious, unus mundus, within the imaginary domain and become one with the collective of all thought and feeling that has ever existed. However, many souls reject this loss of individuality and become gnosis, monstrous beings who to material universe appear as scary AF aliens that reject the laws of physics. At some point, even the vastness of imaginary number domain can't sustain all the gnosis within it, causing them to spill into the material universe's real number domain and destroy all of its realms, which in turn will lead to the destruction of even the highest layer of the reality, the upper domain, as it too exists in delicate balance with the lower domain. Not even God can exist in a vacuum without humanity. To avoid this eventual collapse, Unus Mundus created this immortal being, Wilhelm. After we have gotten past some 30 hours of cutscenes and 7 billion walls of dialogue, Wilhelm's plan is revealed to be as follows. using Zohar and powers of Anima and Animus through a device called Zarathustra. He will enact the eternal recurrence, which will reset all of the lower domain existence to earlier point in its history, that being Big Bang, after which the universe will again proceed to the brink of collapse like the last time, only for Wilhelm to again gather all that shit together and repeat the process. Thus, the universe will never see its end, nor evolve past a certain point. Each cycle is virtually the same, albeit with some deviations, as Udu, godlike being of upper domain, is outside of these resets and can still fuck with lower domain through the Zohar, which eventually creates ripples that allow our characters to resolve this loop. In other words, it could be possible that at some point after Xenosaga 3, the eternal recurrence still ends up activating somehow, or perhaps does in alternate universe, and time is reset, and now entirely new story ends up taking place. While I think this could be a cool twist, it would make sense only if we assume Udu or wave existence or whatnot outside force mucked with the events so that they'd end up differently, since everything would happen the same otherwise. This is nearly not as big of a stretch as you think, since there is some evidence of all Xenoworks having shared universe, or at least they had at one point during the development. In Xenogears Perfect Works, Takahashi described his story being formed of 3 parts. First was the history before Gears, which would be Saga, second was Gears itself, and the third was the unknown future that he clearly had plans for even then. Xenoblade being all about the future. I would almost be bold enough to say that Klaus's world, the OG universe, is meant to be that third part, with some changed details, taking place so far into the Gears timeline's future that humanity picked itself up from the rubble and advanced to the conditions we see during the phase transition experiments, which is generally implied to be thanks to the conduit's discovery and maybe all that technology that was left over after Xenogears became basis for artifices and the like. And same countries that existed million years ago are formed back again, and Gears is a different planet from Earth. Okay, maybe that's stretching the logic a bit, but it's not like real-life geography is any more realistic than that. The eternal recurrence theory is rather unlikely, as it was seemingly stopped for good during Xenosaga 3, and it's still happening despite everything would pretty much shit on the entire story of the trilogy, just to keep the franchise going, especially since that's not really needed in order to explain away the connections to the prior installments in the face of much cleaner, environment-friendly options, like the multiverse. Also, this scenario would create inconsistencies like how we'd have like 2 or 3 different Zohars in the universe depending on how we interpret the timeline. The third theory is slight alteration of this one, which would try and resolve these issues by basically turning Blade into Saga AU, using that f***ing radio as a baseline. Off of it, you could make the connection that Klaus's universe is what you'd get from Xenosaga, but what if Wilhelm was not there? In Xenosaga, when the Earth got destroyed by the Zohar experiments, Wilhelm was there to contain the resulting space-time anomaly to just Earth. But in Xenoblade, when the same thing happened, a transition was allowed to freely rent the universe in 2. However, these instances of Earth being ended in both franchises have too many different details to be literally the same event. Like for instance, those experiments were headed by totally different guys. And ironically, Dmitry Yuryev's presence also throws a wrench in things, since in Saga he is implied to have been born much later, since he's a designer baby, which Galaxy Federation created to combat Church of Ormus, which supposedly took place after the Earth was lost, etc. Unless they retcon these details a bit, this theory will never work. Though I'll have to admit that Yuryev's presence here is basically the only one that needs in-depth explanation. At the end of the day, all 3 Xeno series likely occupy different, albeit similar universes in a shared multiverse, since all of that is basically already being set up. The contradictory details between the 3 just won't allow them to be the exact same one. Future Reading Radio definitely suggests that there's intriguingly similar world building in Blade as there was in Saga, but as of now, the multiverse is most overwhelmingly logical conclusion. The fourth and the final theory is basically DLC for the first one, and literally based on just one line that one character said just once that one time. When Klaus describes the activation of the conduit, he states that great deal of things were sent to great many dimensions, meaning more than just the two that were created by him. This could be inferred to mean that Xenogears, Saga and Gears, etc. were either created by the phase transition event or got stuff sent into them from Klaus's world, thus explaining the overlap between all the universes. And the radio in Redeemed could even be explained by something as asinine as those changes traveling back in time as well as dimensions. And that's what we are seeing. Maybe. This is all just conjecture. Nothing I've said is absolutely confirmed. And only a Sith deals in absolutes. As to how Cosmos would exist as Blade in all of these explanations, she must have somehow ended up in Xeno 2's original world from her own universe or time period, which there would be no end of possible explanations for, this being Xeno series and all. Perhaps Klaus found her original body before or after the world was ripped in two, and its data was used to create the core crystal, Antos, though this is only speculation. Her appearance at the end of the future Redeemed would suggest that there might have been two cosmoses running around simultaneously at one point in history, the actual OG one and the Blade one. Or maybe the Blade one is still the original and is the one landing on Earth. We don't know. We'll just have to wait for the follow-up to know for sure. We know Monolift's up to something big, not saying it's Cosmos related, but it could be. Regardless of how certain lore details work, being largely unexplained at this point, the evidence of the connection is undeniable. Even if you had definitive proof that said that they didn't connect, there isn't, but if there was, it still wouldn't matter in terms of scaling. As with all these threads just existing, would make it more than reasonable to say Xenoblade contains and heavily borrows ideas from Gears and Saga, and those would be okay to use to elaborate on unclear story elements and the like. Ah yes, the scaling part. If you're still here, keep listening. Cosmos is the most important thing here. Her presence is useful in proving Zohar and Xenosaga cosmology existing in Xenoblade universe for scaling purposes, as she not only exists thanks to the verse that she operates in, but the said verse operates under very specific rules that are already partially showcased in Blade to begin with. Cosmos also literally draws her power from her verse's cosmology, mainly Zohar and Animus. The conduit being some different higher dimensional interface in the same world as Cosmos and not the Zohar wouldn't really make sense. So it really must be the Zohar then. And by extension, the thing that Zohar/conduit draws its power from must also exist in Blade as well, despite being unseen. Since Blade is now part of this saga cosmology, we need to make some changes on how we look at the whole thing. Let me start by drawing you a map. Xenosaga's world is complex macrocosm of various realms, and we need to understand their structure if we want to see just how broken character scaling to it would be. Like I mentioned in passing already, all of existence is basically made up of two different, distinct domains. Upper domain, which could be thought of as the transcendent realm of God, a heaven or nirvana of sorts, and its counterpart, the more pitiable lower domain. Humans, etc. sentient life forms can typically only perceive the lowest realm of the lower domain, aka material universe. The eternal recurrence affects only the realms of lower domain, as upper domain is generally beyond the reach of humanity. Lower domain is also known as dimensional universe, and is where all the concepts and ideas limited to dimensions exist, while upper domain transcends the very concept of dimensions. Indeed. Outerversal Xenoblade meta is real and pretty undeniable. Lower domain is constantly referred to as the dimensional universe, or universe bound by dimensions, in comparison to the upper domain, inside materials like Xeno 3 Official Guide and the Perfect Guide. And considering that the difference between upper and lower is larger than the difference between all the crazy dimensions within lower domain, this claim becomes very reasonable. Lower domain is consistently shown to include higher spatio-temporal dimensions, such as infinite possible timelines and universes, hyperspaces, and the imaginary number domain that I mentioned previously, which I'm gonna shorten into IND from now on. The series also famously alludes to and references many theories of quantum mechanics, Hilbert spaces being a notable one, as it ties heavily to Cosmos' Hilbert effect ability. Hilbert spaces are a term in mathematics, which are methods in which the linear algebra can be applied to be generalized from finite to infinite dimensional spaces, implying that I and D creatures like the Gnosis have to be calculated from anywhere between any finite number of dimensions up to level of infinite dimensions in order to be interactable by the real number domain's third dimension. Path of Sephiroth is another similar realm where all possibilities exist as reality. Albedo also talks about eternal chain when alluding to the path towards the upper domain, which may or may not support the notion of there being infinite dimensions between lower and upper domains. Basically, lower domain is dimensioned universe that has many extremely relevant higher dimensions, more than likely up to infinite dimensions, while the upper domain is ultraversal realm above even dimensional theories, bare minimum. So that was a lot of insane sounding stuff at once. Now, keep looking at this handy map while I start explaining all those crazy sounding keywords I just blurted out. One by one. First we have Udu, being of upper domain that can only be described as the highest power in the entire franchise. It is a waveform entity beyond any conceivable laws aside from its own, unable to be comprehended by humans, though ironically, its only wish is to understand humans and their self-destructive wish for isolation and rejection, in order to try and define its own existence in comparison. It is Udu's power, siphoned from its higher realm, that gives power to those who tap into Zohar, which may have also created all of life to begin with. It is virtually all-powerful. It is the Human Instrumentality Project. It is geometrical shape never seen before. It is the concept of Charlotte's Web, the movie. It is every YouTube tutorial you ever or will ever watch. It is SCP-3999. It is Marionic 90's shittier microphone. It is all and none of the above. Udu is basically the pre-creational god from Jewish mystic text Kabbalah, Ein Sof, a term coined by our friend Avicebron, actually. Ein Sof explores the idea of how an omnipotent deity would be so much beyond all things, form, thought, contradiction, identification, and anything really, that they'd be functionally non-existent being that is one with all but alone, with nothing to distinguish itself from before giving form to the world around them, or observing things in it to give itself separate, distinguishable features. This being the creation of the universe and humanity in Kabbalah. Bringing this up because not only does this characterize Udu as the undisputed powerhouse of the franchise, but also supports the idea that they are at least outerversal, which in all honesty would be far too limiting of a term for a being like them, not to even speak of trying to rationalize God. As the supreme being of Xeno cosmology, Udu replaces another mysterious waveform entity from Xenogears that had similar function for the plot, called the wave existence. The two are either the same thing or Udu is higher existence altogether. It's suggested that Udu is not the sole existence in upper domain, so the two can easily coexist. Next up, the often talked about Zohar. Zohar is a mysterious golden energy construct that functions as gateway between the upper and lower domain that has existed possibly from the beginning of time. Udu has used it as its point of contact with lower domain numerous times, and thus its energies leak through it and can basically be used as infinite source of energy for various purposes, like powering Cosmos and Telos and bunch of other shit. It seems to exist in various universes in various forms, and humanity etc. trying to unlock its secrets is basically the inciting incident in all three Xeno series, which included the causing of space-time transition of Xenoblade fame. Zohar also possesses power of phenomenon shift that allows it and people tapping into its power to alter phenomena by replacing a possibility with potential alternate possibilities based on their desires. Basically, it's the power to become the main character. For example, if I was connected to Zohar and had the non-specific delusion, I mean wish for this video to get a lot of views, all other possibilities where such doesn't happen would get axed, and circumstances leading to lots of views coming my way would take place, whatever those may end up being. Basically, another fate manipulation hack, similar to something else we've seen in the franchise. That's right, the most important thing in the entire f***ing franchise, now and forever, is f***ing 2001 A Space Odyssey reference. The entire studio making these games is named after it. Come on! Average barbarians, people, could never understand all the layers this reference, and definitely an in-joke has. Vessels of Anima, or Power of Anima, along with its counterpart, Animus, are yet another complicated power from Xenosaga. They take their names from a pair of dualistic archetypes from Carl Jung's psychology that form union of opposing forces of feminine and masculine in the mental landscape. In Xenosaga, Anima and Animus were created as failsafes similar to Wilhelm by Unus Mundus, but instead of focusing on the lower domain's welfare, their goal was to safeguard the larger creation. These powers were wielded by two beings called Yeshua, who in modern day is known as Chaos, and Mary Magdalene. Yes, that Mary Magdalene. Chaos's anima is meant to wipe all of lower domain clean in a way that upper domain structure would be spared. Remember, lower domain contains all dimensions. While Mary's animus would control anima, basically being failsafe's failsafe. Mary's soul then would later inhabit cosmos, meaning that she can basically use the powers of anima and animus through an alternate personality. Together, they manifested thousands of years ago and became disciples of the Messiah. That's right, the Joestar himself, Jesus Christ, is canon to Xenoblade Chronicles. See all those JoJo references in my Xeno 2 video? It all connects, my dude. Unlike the biblical Christ, he was not divine in any way. Instead, Yeshua and Mary performed all the miracles, while Christ would guide the people with his teachings. Thus, this trio basically makes up biblical Christ in this version of events. Together they created Zarathustra, originally to ascend humanity to upper domain, the same device Wilhelm would co-opt into his eternal recurrence plan. Apparently, this device was created in each loop, and he always ended up yoinking it for his own schemes. And that's the world we are operating in. Gnostic cosmology, Jungian philosophy, psychology by Friedrich Nietzsche, Jesus and sci-fi movie references.
I don't understand anything anymore!
You'll get used to it. Side note, it's weird how much I love these elements in Xenogears and Saga, considering they basically make them video game equivalents of f***ing Neon Genesis Evangelion, and I don't particularly care for that franchise. Now that this massive cosmology is established, we can actually do some scaling for Xenoblade for once. While the conduit in Xeno 2 in on itself evaded explanation, if we borrow ideas from the past games, it becomes very easy to explain what its deal is. Since it's obviously Xenoblade Universe's version of Zohar, it would in turn mean that the likes of Trinity processors, Artifices, Xeno 1 gods, and likely Mobius are all linked to Zohar, either directly gaining their power from it or were shaped by the ascension it caused. Heck, it might be that all of Xeno 2 blades, and thus all humans born from Origin, have a slight connection to Zohar due to Trinity processors being used in their creation, and maybe even all of Ether is connected, and thus far-flung dimension in Xeno 2 would be the same thing as the upper domain, and the true power source of the conduit would be Udu, or yet another wave existence from the same realm. Logically, we would assume that most of Xenoblade's storyline we see takes place in the lower domain, like you'd assume we would be told if the entire story took place in some higher dimension, like in Umineko or some shit. This is where all of our multiverses and timelines exist. Naturally, Gears and Saga, having infinite timelines and possibilities, reinforces the consistent scaling I've outlined for Xenoblade in prior videos, with the general structure of spacetime in the verse being at least 6-dimensional. Memory space existing above that time-space would be bare minimum 7th dimensional, and in turn, IND would be the peak of lower domain, as it would extend to as high as infinite dimensional. And while there are quite few things scaling to it, Zohar / the conduit granting its users power from upper domain would mean far more for the Xenoblade scaling, as literally everyone relevant should scale to some degree of it, since everyone scales to Cosmos and Telos, via them being blades, who, yes, are notably powerful, but in all honesty, probably lower than the endgame characters, due to full power Aegis and Master Blade being stated to be above all of blade kind. More importantly, Master Driver Rex and Numa also draw their power from the Zohar, like Cosmos and Telos, and thus wield upper domain energies as well, while Shulk and the rest of the Monado users are treated as more powerful than that. The Monado likely also drawing its power directly from the conduit, and may even be speculated to have significantly affected the thing. Basically all the strongest characters in the series, either directly or indirectly, link back to Zohar and thus Udu's waves, while the rest of the relevant cast are treated as being on the same dimensional tier, or at worst one below them. Considering how scaling to other versatile power sources in the series is more common than a trap is in Thailand, the cast would in fact not be 70 as previously scaled, but instead gods who more than likely solo your favorite wars. Well, it's not exactly that simple. Once again we run into the same logic problem as I did in my Xeno 2 video, where everything scaling to conduit would scale everyone above the gods in the worst, including themselves, despite them clearly being weaker than them. Again, my handy well metaphor would fix the scale. The upper domain energy our characters would wield still being virtually infinite compared to their normal strength, and would still put everyone into that infinite dimensional scale, wherein the god tiers must also be with this updated scale, which would also be consistent with Chaos's and Mary's feats. So while our characters are strong as cheese, they are not ultra-versal. But there are a few other explanations as well that aren't as contrived as that. Memory space is the problem here, yeah? Since Zanza and Shulk can't be lower than Xeno 2 cast and have the conduit's power like them, it would be weird for them to scale to a hard limit lower than that. But memory space doesn't have to be a hard limit, actually. Nothing really restricts Zanza and Shulk, etc. into scaling only to its level specifically. Since they don't scale to it, they scale to Passage of Fate, which is explicitly shown to control memory space. So you could easily say that they scale above it in dimensions. Memory space doesn't have to be the max. At the time I simply put them on the same dimensional scale that it was on, as there was not enough evidence to put them any higher than it. And even if all of the ether and matter and whatnot is born from the higher dimensional energy, we can just say that they are not on the same tier due to not demonstrating such. An atom is obviously infinitesimally below a guy made of bunch of atoms, and that guy would be below the upper domain's total power. Alternatively, memory space doesn't even have to be lower than the conduit, despite being made by it sort of. It could be on the same level of existence, and what I mean by that is that it's the same as two third-dimensional guys fighting. One's wall level, while the other one is solar system buster, which is an immense difference of power despite the two occupying the same dimension. There can be differences in power level, that's basic power scaling actually. It should be noted that the power of the conduit elevated Zanza, Maineth and Alvis into godhood could be interpreted as them being elevated into either partial or full-time upper domain existences, as that would be considered the domain of God, though gods normally existing as mere souls in Xeno 1 would suggest that their ascension had more to do with imaginary number domain maybe? Just throwing arguments here. A theory, if you will. One that likely isn't true. But if I'm allowed to throw one more, memory space itself could be a stand-in for, or just straight up a part of upper domain, as that is historically removed from all of time and residing place of gods. Additionally, there's a legit case for Alvis maybe being one of the wave existences from the upper domain, trapped within a Trinity processor core, rather than just an entity loaning power from the upper domain / far-flung dimension, similar to how wave existence was trapped by Zohar in Xenogears. Reasons to believe this include Alvis being referred to as the source of God's power, or God itself, like beings of upper domain are always described as, and them sharing virtually identical role to Zohar / Deus system from Gears, as well as many similarities with Chaos, Wilhelm and Udu of Saga. If Alvis is a wave existence type being, as many hints suggest, many pieces start to fall into place, and this would also explain their stronger connection to these higher dimensional forces compared to their sibling Aegises, and what exactly is going on in Xeno 1's ending. Actually, you know what? Hold that thought, since there's a more blatant connection regarding this idea. Either in Xeno 1 is sometimes described to exist in waves, similar to Udu or wave existence. Either itself is hinted to have come into being thanks to the conduit's space-time transition, which was confirmed to be the case in Gears. Xeno 1 universe is entirely made up of ether, and considering Xeno 2's universe being mostly made up of remnants of Klaus's OG world, and it possesses ether as well, but is not made up of it in its entirety, it would make sense if the Xeno 1's new universe was made entirely of this newly born miracle energy, and only some of it seeped into Xeno 2's world, where the conduit still resides in. I really like this theory, considering how literally everything gets connected to the franchise origins this way. The only thing that would contradict it would be the part of Xeno 2, where Mythra using Siren is explicitly stated to be not based on ether, as Obrona could not mess with it, and we know for a fact that Siren is powered by the conduit, so jury is still out on that one. I guess one could interpret it as the act of her controlling Siren not being based on ether, but Siren would be, and the bad guys can't affect it in space. Though why'd Malos say this line would become even more weird. Interestingly, ether in its original characterization in Gears was stated to be created as one of the ways Zohar's phenomenon shift is expressed. And just like in Xeno 1, in a world full of ether, a force called Passage of Fate controls all of ether to effect phenomena in form of the not-crushing power to determine destiny, again pointing us towards this conclusion. And considering this all comes from a certain wave existence, well, I'm not saying that my beloved Solo's Your Worst Totally Not Homo crush Alvis is a wave existence. But my beloved Solo's Your Worst Totally Not Homo crush Alvis is probably a wave existence though. Lastly, before capping the video off, there are a few pieces of wank we must discuss. No power scaling video is complete without such really. The upper domain is baseline outer reversal, right? In truth, it too possesses a similar two-part structure as lower domain does. However, whether or not this actually impacts the scaling is a bit of a mystery, since due to humanity's inability to observe the upper domain, whether or not Udo exists on its lower or upper layer is uncertain. But considering how Udo is stated to be highest being in existence and God itself, it may well exist in the upper domain. So would this place Udo and by extension its waves to a higher dimensional difference above baseline outer? No, since as we already went through, there is like infinity of dimensions between lower domain's lowest and highest points. And if the structure was same, the difference should be as well. And thus Udo would have infinite dimensional difference to baseline outer reversal, aka just shy of high outer reversal. First of all, the series can go even beyond that, since I and D could very well be interpreted as being beyond dimensional space as well, as in various points it has been stated to be beyond all physical laws, which in this context likely doesn't mean in third dimensional sense, but would include the likes of quantum and dimensional theories that are referenced in every third Xenosaga technobabble scene or so. Also, I and D being a realm of collective human thought and all concepts and theories we've ever come up with, which may very well include things like Platonic concepts, which would be outer reversal, bumping up upper domain into being bare minimum higher dimensional level above baseline outer reversal, and high outer due to also having a dual layer structure like the lower domain. It is a bit unclear whether or not the concepts in I&D exist as anything more than informational ideas, however, making this line of reasoning a bit questionable.
Wait, stop. Didn't you say that them imaginary numbers were a part of lower domain? That place has those shitty dimensions because it's called the dimensional universe. It can't be our reversal. You said so yourself in the map part.
Did I do that? Yes, it would be a bit weird for imaginary numbers to be beyond dimensions, considering both how lower domain is named and separated from upper domain. But I guess I could twist this into lower domain only being called dimensioned universe because it has dimensions included in it, and not necessarily because all of its realms have to have numerically quantifiable dimensions. I personally wouldn't use this interpretation due to how unclear it is. But basically, the result that comes out of all of this wacko nonsense is that Xenoverse is either outer reversal, infinite dimensional difference to outer reversal, or high outer reversal. While the last two interpretations are plausible, they can't be confirmed. And as I've already stressed in these kinds of videos, we'll be continuing on with what is most consistently provable and requires less contrivances. Therefore, this Xeno scaling series will continue on with the logic that upper domain is baseline outer versal, and most of our cast god tiers in particular scale to a fragment of highest being in that dimensional tier, making Xenoblade easily the strongest out of Nintendo's many franchises, and places it among the upper echelon of JRPG genre in general, as far as power is concerned. But calm down, I'm not saying that Xenoblade is one of the strongest gaming franchises of all time. Not yet. Uncharacteristically for me, this time I'll have to admit that not even Kirby can solo. And here we have it. This is the inevitable result of Monolift Soft including Xenosaga into the story of Xenoblade. A metric ton of lore, and everything that comes with it. These are all ideas that are present in these games even when our characters aren't aware of them. I mean, there are still a lot of cool feats that I could talk about to exhaustion. Feats that either reinforce Xenosaga characters scaling to these tiers or awesome lower shit, like Cosmos' phase transition tech being able to vaporize stars, Gnosis devastating star systems, as well as all the majestic ships and constructs that dwarf planets or solar systems in size. That should be inferior to Cosmos and Tails, and Fei Wong with just some of wave existence amp, causing baseline 4-dimensional big bangs as a usable attack in game. Suck it, Sephiroth, but I've already talked about stuff that makes all of that irrelevant. So I guess now is the time to move to the conclusions. The conclusion is that the unwanked Goku loses, and most of your favorites too. But remember, the legacy of Xenogears and Xenosaga is not just about the robust amp they give to Xenoblade's power scaling via their shared connection, but can also be seen in shared themes, story elements, and the cyclical nature of the entire franchise. And it's very intentional why it's that way. There is something mighty interesting happening here. While Gears largely failed to achieve the vision Takahashi and everybody had, both as a game and as a story, Saga fared almost equally poorly, and now Xenoblade, the most successful Xeno series to date, seems to be the third attempt at getting the same ideas out into the public. It almost seems like Takahashi is stuck telling the same story that many didn't want to hear the first time around, but due to sheer skill and persistence, he has finally reached a future where people finally not only got into it, but better yet, even those who noticed he was mostly rehashing the same shit are only complimenting him for doing so. By hook or crook, he shall have this one specific story he probably conceived back in high school or whatever come to life. Seriously, what a trooper. What I'm trying to say is, maybe it's not incorrect to say that enduring a harsh world like this is the reason Xenoblade exists in the first place. And that's how past Xeno games connect to the current games and their implications to the lore, almost 30 years in making, and from the looks of it, we are just getting started. Hope you learned something about Xeno series' history and its intriguing world building, and maybe even about some religious/mystical references hidden in it. Most people don't know this stuff, seriously. Every modern Xeno series fan gangsta till Gears and Saga come up. The final part of this series, at least as of the foreseeable future, will be on Xenoblade Chronicles 3 and will release in few months or something. So keep those notifications on and run up all the views and likes on my last 2 episodes. Can you believe that this video was originally supposed to be just a part of the second or the first Xenoblade power scales videos? Instead, it got longer and longer, and the additional research time just kept on stretching. It was like reading Moby Dick or some shit. No, more like the Bible, or Iliad and Odyssey. No, Journey to the West is the way to go, or Mahabharata. Well, these big projects are meant to be time-consuming, I suppose. Anyway, now that I've gone over Xeno canon, what's the Peanut Gallery's opinion on all of this? Feel free to write your thoughts, observations, and theories down in the comments below, and let's get the discussions rolling. But don't f***ing disagree with me, or I'll kill you. I'm just kidding. That too is more than welcome. If this franchise has taught us anything, it should be that our preconceptions are often wrong, and there's always room for growth. I'm Marnik90, love you all, and I'll see you someday soon.